Hello and welcome. My name's Liz Day. We're here today to talk about sleep and to talk about baby's sleep during Sleep Support Month with Snooze. And it's wonderful that I've got Sam Saunders here with me, the baby guru, that's going to be helping answer your questions. Sam and also myself, we've had quite a fair amount of experience with babies, parents and children. So hopefully going to be able to share some of those tips with you and help you over those early months, which can be absolutely wonderful and delightful, but also a little bit challenging at times, and also help to dispel some of those myths. But I'm going to hand you over to Sam now, because she's going to explain what she does and her background, which I think you'll find, really interesting.
Sam. Hi, Liz. Nice to meet you. So my name is Sam Saunders, also known as the Baby Guru. And I work supporting families as a gentle parenting and baby coach. So I look at the whole 24 hours, which is really important. And I help with routine and sleep, weaning, feeding, introducing a bottle, whatever families need. I work all over the world. And during this time, I've been doing a lot of remote support, which is great. But my background is in midwifery and health visiting, and I'm a mum of 4 boys, and I'm a grandma as well. So my entire career has been with babies and families, and I love to bring a bit of balance and harmony to families and look at how working with mums and dads and their expectations and how they parent, because we all do it differently, and sort of finding that balance that helps a family grow and mature and nurture each other.
Very much so, actually. I think it is looking at it holistically. I think very much as parents, it's or you're working as a couple, if you both sort of in agreement of the route that you want to go, it's so much easier. And it's working that through together about what your style of parenting and what you'd like to go with, really. But I also think the other thing is, and I think we both sort of feel this as well, is always thinking about the baby's needs. I think it's looking at the baby and the sort of baby that you sort of develop, and they all have their different traits and little personalities. But I always think it's focusing on really what makes them happy and makes them feel content. And sometimes that may not be quite what we're thinking we're going to do, but actually it really suits baby. And I always feel at the heart of it, especially when this baby is very young, is, the heart of it is what's right for baby and what's going to work right for that particular baby. Because if it does, the chances are it'll make everybody else in the home feel rather relaxed, sort of a little bit, life becomes a little bit easier sometimes. Now, we're going to go on to the first question, really, which I think actually can be such an exciting time, but also overwhelming at the same time, a little bit daunting, is you've had the baby, you've gone through the pregnancy, you've may have had baby at home, you may have had baby in a hospital, but now you've got baby, you're at home alone with this little one. And it's what to expect. We know there's lots of things happening during the first week and the second week of having this baby. But I also find it's really helpful and quite, can be sort of quite empowering to have a really good idea about what's happening in that first 7 to 14 days when you come home. And what's happening with sleep, with baby, and to just be really prepared for that, actually. And I think that can give a lot of reassurance sometimes for pregnant women that are expecting their baby, but also ones that are in that situation now. But Sam, do you want to take us through a little bit, those first early weeks, is what to expect, sort of from baby, and to the focus sort of as we're talking about sleep on this occasion, and what to expect with regards to sleep.
So I mean, some babies do pop out rather sleepy, and others are sort of wide awake, and so you don't know what you're going to get, I have to say. Sleep is a bit all over the place, and they do come out rather nocturnal, as though they're born on the other side of the world. So they quite often sleep away the day and are wide awake all night. So as much as you might be warned that that might happen, it's living with that reality of being up a lot. So it's about trying to find a balance and make life as easy as you can during those early weeks. So maybe sort of having some meals prepared in the freezer, or if somebody says, can I drop round some things, so that you've got things easy to hand, because you might be sort of you know, up for long hours at night, and you're sort of exhausted during the day. So having things in place, you know, it really does help. I mean, babies generally sort of feed every 2 to 3 hours when they're newborn, and it might be when you're establishing breastfeeding that it's even more often. It could be the first couple of weeks it's every hour and a half. That's quite normal, and feeds can be quite long, and usually the feeding sort of settles down around that 2-week mark, and you know, they might be taking short little sleeps, you know, 20 minutes and then waking again, or they might be doing really long, sort of a couple of hours in the afternoon, and you know, that's the time to make the most of it yourself, and sort of maybe go and have a lie down, and not worrying about, you know, the housework can wait, the phone call can wait. You know, it's about trying to get some naps in yourself when they're having a nap. That's really important. It's about getting to know your baby, about, you know, looking at them, spending time with them, engaging with them, you know, and when they are awake, enjoying those sort of cuddles with them, and not worrying too much about, you know, they've got to go down and they've got to do this. It's quite normal for little ones for the first couple of weeks to want to sleep on you. If you think they've been contained in that lovely warm bubble inside you, and they've had consistent, they can hear your heartbeat and they hear your voice, and I bet your baby's been quite active at night, you know, often. So they come out and they're active at night. So, you know, if they do want to sort of have those sleeps on you, it is about safe sleeping, about keeping them, you know.
Yes, yes, yeah.
It is normal for them to want to be held a lot and contained and feel held. That is quite normal in those first 2 weeks.
I think it is. I think it's that skin to skin contact that sometimes happens a little bit as well, that can be very soothing for baby and also for mum. But I think it's interesting what you're saying about, you know, sort of giving that time to yourself and to your baby during that as much as possible. And if you have got support around you, and I know with some cultures as well, they often say, you know, for mum to be in bed, you know, to be with baby for quite a period of time, you know, to sort of rest and recover. Not that, of course, mum is ill, but actually to just home in on, you know, sort of baby and to focus in on it. And I think to at least give some of that time to baby and to yourself as well, to adjust to this of having this little one around, I think can make it a little bit easier. But the other thing that you mentioned as well, which I thought was good, is, you know, the sort of routine of day-to-day life, you know, putting a few things in place that are very easy, very straightforward, you know, feeding and making sure you've got the food available, you're drinking a fair bit of water. All of those things I think can make you feel that little bit better. And the other thing is, if you've got your partner around, you know, keeping, and I know definitely not keeping everything, you know, housework and things like that, but if keeping a few things ticking over can sometimes make you feel a little bit more in control. So if your partner can pop the washing on, pop the washing in, you know, and things like that, having a little plan in place can help beforehand, or when you're in the throes of having this baby, I think can be a really good thing. But definitely, I think sort of taking it over those first early weeks, because a lot of it will revolve, as you're saying, about feeding. You know, one of the things that you were just saying there, and I think, you know, parents to remember this, and, you know, mums, is that you often pick baby up to feed, and then you feed, and this is a 2 to 3 hour period that you're feeding baby. But also you do the feeding, you sometimes have to do the changing, you sometimes have to do a little bit of burping and winding baby, and all of that takes a little bit of time. And I think that's often they forget that this is a feeding period, but then there's the settling period after, and feeds can sometimes, what do you find how long feeding takes before you settle baby down to sort of back to sleep again? What have you found, Sam, in your experience?
So with breastfeeding, in the first few weeks, it can be that they feed for quite long periods. They sort of, it could be sort of at least 40 minutes. That's an average sort of feed for the first few weeks. And then as they get older, that gets shorter. And bottle feeding again, it's about being responsive to them, and some feeds will be longer than others. And you might find that in the mornings their feeds are shorter because you've had some rest and your milk supply's a little bit sort of higher. And then by the evening they do what's called cluster feeding, which is where they feed and they drop off, and they feed and they drop off, and you're like, and it can go on for 2 or 3 hours. That's sort of, it could be anything from early evening till early morning that they do this on and off, on and off, on and off. And bottle fed babies do it as well. And they're just sort of getting small amounts, little and often, and then they settle down and have maybe a 2 to 3 hour sort of sleep. So those early weeks are all about being responsive and finding a pattern with your baby. And, that's really important, that you give yourself that time as a family to find that.
Yeah, very much so. And also that it will be always changing. I think that's the other thing for parents to know and to be reassured by, that in those early sort of couple of weeks you'll have a fair amount of support. Your midwife will be contacting you, you may have your health visitor that's in touch with you, and also especially with breastfeeding, there's a lot of changes going on. The sort of the letdown, your milk coming in sort of day 3 or day 4, and the sort of breast changes, all of those things are sort of new. You've not experienced them before, and he's getting used to that, and baby getting used to it as well. But certainly with regards to feeding, especially breastfeeding, if you need help and support, always remember that you can contact your sort of midwife, especially in these COVID times. You can still contact these people, get in touch. There's still a lot of support out there. I think that's really important. No, so if we move on now, Sam, a little bit, from the sort of first early weeks, the first 2 weeks, that we sort of got an idea about what's going to be happening a little bit with sleep. After those 2 weeks, so you're getting onto sort of 3 or 4 weeks old baby. And what do you find? I mean, I find sometimes there's sort of a little bit more of I'm not saying necessarily too much of a pattern's emerging, but I think generally things start to settle a little bit, or sort of settle a little bit down. And you sort of start to feel as though, as a parent, you're getting a little bit more used to doing the nappy changing, to doing the feeding. You're getting experience. You may not feel it, but you're starting to get experience about being a parent. But how do you find the next phase, I suppose, of having this little one? How do you find the best tips are, sort of moving from that sort of early period into this next little phase?
Yes, sort of from about 6 weeks, you begin to see patterns. And what you'll normally find is you'll get sort of 2 to 3 hourly feeds in the day with a little nap in between. And as I say, some of those naps might be short ones and some might be longer ones. And I would I normally suggest you sort of wake and feed them regularly in the day. So, if they're sleeping for long periods, then 3 to 4 hourly feeding is good, if not more frequent if they want it. But letting them have a super 5-hour nap in the afternoon is lovely, but you're likely to have a sort of not as good a night. So it's about just thinking, oh, you've been asleep now quite a long time, let's wake you up, change your nappy, and sort of keep a little rhythm going. Trying to get some rest yourself, looking for signs of them becoming sort of overtired as well at that age. They get irritable, they might sort of be on and off the breast or on and off feeding, and you're not quite sure. And often that's a sign that they're actually tired and they need some help to get to sleep. So, giving them some sort of cuddles and some shushing and patting and rocking, maybe in the sling. You can get some jobs done around the house if you want to by then, and popping them in there so they have a little nap in there is quite good. And, some babies do have a little crying period at that stage. It's quite often in the evening they just don't know what to do, and neither do you. And that's quite normal as well, for that to be part of their day, and you just you've tried everything. You try rocking, you try feeding, you change them. And you might even try sort of starting a little bath time routine then in the evening, and sort of building these little building blocks of getting them up in the morning and that sort of thing. That can start as early as 6 weeks if you're ready, but you will begin to see these rhythms happening, and the feeds, you'll be more confident with your feeding and more confident with winding and all those things.
Yes, yeah, I always find that it's you're still very much guided by the baby and guided by the baby's needs, but just starting to settle into that sort of nice little bedtime routine, you know, sort of doing bathing, you know, sort of calm time, and also making that difference between night and day. I mean, that's one of the things that my experience of working with families and new families, I try to encourage is this sort of, as baby gets that little bit, well, even from, you know, 3 or 4 weeks, it's being exposed to daylight is beneficial with regards to encouraging nighttime sleep. And then whether going to walk in the pram during the day, whether when nap times happen during the day, you know, that it's actually light, it's actually bright, you're not tiptoeing around, you save the quiet periods for night. I think it's, I feel as though there's no harm in sort of, you know, going into that flow or doing that, even at the early stages. It's up to baby what baby decides to do, but having that sort of separating night and day, I think can be quite helpful with regards to getting these basic, you know, some of the foundations in place for maybe good sleep later on. What do you think, Sam, about that?
Yeah, I agree. You know, establishing that night and day, as I said before, they sort of come out a bit nocturnal. So, you know, feeding them in the daytime, in the daylight, so and having some awake time with them, and then in the evenings bring it down quieter, and certainly sort of late evening, you know, going upstairs with them and having a dim light, and, you know, trying not to have sort of maybe a screen on in the bedroom, so that they become aware of the difference between day and night. And when you're doing those night feeds, it's about keeping it taught, you know, if you do talk to them, it's a calm, quieter voice, it's lowering that voice. But in the day, it's sort of, oh, you know, it's a lovely day and let's go out. And it's about making that difference. Nappy changes at night to as calm and quiet as possible. So that they begin to feel, as well as see visually, a difference between day and night. And, you know, starting the day by opening the curtains, changing their nappy, getting them dressed, maybe giving them you know, what we call top and tail, giving them a little wash down in the morning, and sort of, you know, and establishing that little sort of pattern is really important.
Very much so, actually. And I think what's interesting, you know, sort of about the night time and the sort of, you know, night feeds and having those feeds around about 3 or 4 o'clock, you remember some of the babies that I've cared for and looked after, how many of them sometimes get to about 6 or 7 weeks and you're doing a feed and they evidently think that this is time to have a time, you know, a cooing and a babbling time, and they want to engage and want to have a nice little smile. And you're thinking, I wonder how I can keep this sort of a little bit calmer, because you're encouraging sleep. So it's very tempting to sort of join in this lovely dance of what your baby wants to do at maybe 3 or 4 o'clock. But it's sort of still acknowledging that, but actually still keeping it quite calm and keeping it, they save those wonderful interactions for during the day and during the, you know, the middle of the night. But babies are wonderful, how they are so, in a way, they do adapt. Very, to a certain extent, you know, they're picking up lots of cues from us, and I think there's security, and I think all the cuddles that you're giving and all those sorts of things that happen right from the start, these all help with regards to sort of making them feel, you know, loved and secure, ready, you know, and also to sleep. I mean, all of these sort of help to make this baby feel very contented, you know, which is such a, you know, such an important thing about those early weeks, really, spending time cuddling and getting to know your baby. I think that is the other, when you are feeling a little bit exhausted and tired, is also sort of you know, realizing this period of time, and everybody says this sometimes and it gets a little bit annoying for new parents, but is that it doesn't last long. You feel it lasts long because you're awake for quite a bit of the time, and the day feels a little bit longer. But newborn babies are very short. That period of time when you can say that a classic really newborn is relatively short, and you will be moving on so quickly into the next stage. So it's sort of not to try and rush it too much, and also to think, look, this is going to get, you know, will get easier, and it will get more of a pattern will start to emerge actually. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm going to sort of be, we've talked about quite a bit about this newborn phase, but also the other thing that we know that we get asked about, a little bit about sleep safety. And a little bit about products as well, to do with, you know, the sort of early months, you know, the first 6 months. Now, I don't know what you feel, Sam, but with regards to sleep, the best place for babies to sleep in the early months is in a crib of some kind. You know, the side sleeping cribs are wonderful and very helpful, you know, when mum's feeding and to have, you know, got connection with baby, but actually you've got your own space for sleep. Baby's got their own space, and you've got your own space as well. And with regards to overheating, you've got the own blankets for baby as well, which is always such a good thing. Now, I know that some parents think about, oh, well, we'd be using a car seat, maybe we're using a sling, maybe, and all of these things. And also, you know, if you're using a pram, a buggy, try and use the lie flat, you know, sort of. Often they're very expensive items and you get a carry cart, and there's a temptation not to necessarily use that, but it's a good thing to use when babies are little, and especially when the weather's a bit cooler and a bit colder. It's great for that lying flat in those early weeks and early months. So that's the most important thing, is baby to be in a good, safe crib location, and also somewhere that you can move it around from room to room. You know, some of them you can lift off and take into the room that you're in, so baby is close by. We know, and I know that health visitors, midwife, the professionals that you've dealt with will be talking about babies going on their back to sleep. That's the safest position. We've known this for a number of years now. It is not placing baby on their side or their tummy. That is not the recommended position now. So those are the key things to remember with regards to baby close to you, definitely for the first 6 months, in the bedroom with you at night. That is really wonderful and the best place for baby to be. In the next session that we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking about the following 6 months, so we can cover the other, what happens when baby possibly moves into their own room. But it's keeping it simple, relatively simple, with regards to bedding and also what baby should wear. It's amazing how this can be quite confusing, I think, to parents. But, you know, just think about, you know, your little one. If the room starts to get cold, you start to get cold, then have a look at your baby, check your baby. If the room gets hot or warm, and definitely in the summertime, if you're feeling warm, always check on your child at that point. The other thing is have a thermometer possibly in the room. A lot of these monitors have the temperature up, so you know what the temperature is. What I generally say with regards to bedding is baby needs what I like to use for babies is a bodysuit that goes under the nappy. They're wonderful, they keep everything in place. It's like a little vest. And then very you know, relatively thin, little cotton sleep suits to start with. The poppers, and some of them have zips. The zips are very wonderful, actually, they're quite handy. But that's quite, you know, it's simple, it's not too warm for baby, and it's just what they need with regards to going to sleep. And then either using blankets, a sheet and a lightweight blankets, maybe 1 or 2 depending on the temperature, and a fitted sheet. Fitted sheets are wonderful. You have to go for fitted sheets because otherwise they're always coming off and, you know, sort of coming untucked. The other thing, I sometimes use a muslin over the top of the mattress. Tuck it under, well under, because babies dribble a lot, you know, they get a lot of their feed comes up, so I tend to do that. And later on, when baby gets a little bit bigger, so, you know, it has to be 4 kilograms, around about 8 pounds. You can then think about the baby sleeping bags, which are wonderful, very easy to use, and are great for, you know, nighttime. Some of them, you know, have a zip in, so you can just change their nappy, and they come in different TOG ratings. Now, the TOG ratings, you just don't get too confused about it. We have TOG ratings on duvets. This is TOG rating on these baby sleeping bags. Higher the TOG rating, the more warmth, you know, the thicker the fabric. The lower ones, only about 1 TOG. They're used for summertime, possibly, and even during the summer, you may not even be using a sleeping bag because it may be too warm. But it's picking the one that generally is used, certainly for probably English British weather, is the 2.5 tog for a fair bit of the time. And also if your heating goes off at night, those sort of things, the temperature drops. Now, what would you wear under the baby sleeping bag? So I generally tend to suggest, and Sam, you can, I'll let you answer in a second, is the vest, the bodysuit, and then just a plain thin sleep suit, and then the actual sleeping bag on top. And that is for when it's quite cool, it's quite winter months. Then you've got the sleep suit, then the body vest, the vest, and then you've got a sleeping bag on top. No other blankets, no other sheets need to go on baby at all. And in the summer, and probably when it's still coolish in the evening, I'd do a little vest, and then the one tog sleeping bag would go on top. That's what I do. Sam, do you have any suggestions on products or clothing for babies at all?
So, I mean, some parents like to swaddle for the first.
Oh, wonderful! That's good point. Yes,
first few weeks, and it's important to do safe swaddling. And there are, about not restricting their arms and their hips, and it's about sort of stopping that startle, that Moro reflex. It's about keeping
very much.
Because when they're inside you, they've got the walls, so they've got mum's tummy there. So it's about using a swaddle. And if people ask me when's a good time to sort of remove it, I'd say about 12 weeks. So there are safe swaddles out there, and it's about, again, layering it up underneath. So the little short sleeve vest or bodysuit, and then a sleep suit on top, and then just a simple swaddle. And again, no blankets or anything like that.
Very much.
And then when they go into, and then when they're a little bit older, they can go into the sleeping bags, and making sure they've got correct fitting one that fits them. They can't sort of sink, so it's not too long on them. So buying one that is suitable for 4 to 6 months. If you do use a smaller one, or 3 to 6 months, and then you can go on to the bigger ones. Sometimes if it's really cold in your bedroom, then you could put a long sleeve vest on and a bodysuit, a sleep suit.
That's a good idea. Yes.
Another sort of layer you could do.
Yes.
And I would say probably having a couple of them. If somebody wants to buy you a gift, then a sleep suit is always something, to buying that aunts and uncles or friends might like to buy. So
yes.
I definitely 2 in stock, so you've got one in the wash and one on the go.
So this is the baby sleeping bags. Have a couple of them.
Sleeping bags, sleeping bags or a swaddle blanket, whatever you're using, is having a couple, so that you've always got one spare one sort of to go. And as you say, sleeping them on their backs, the bottom of the crib or the basket, whatever you're using,
foot
on their backs, and no rolling them on the sides or anything like that. And keeping them close to you, in the day as well, having them downstairs with you wherever you are, so that they're sleeping with you, and you can pick up on their early feeding cues then, and things like that.
Very much so, yeah. And I like the thing about the swaddling as well. Yes, I think there is some nice little swaddling sort of outfits, I suppose, ready garments that you can use, and some are not too restrictive, and I quite like those. They zip up, the arms are a little bit free, but it stops that reflex a little bit. If you have a baby that startles quite a bit, it can be quite nice to use. And again, it's always sleeping baby on their backs, it's very important. And having a couple of them, you're right, so one's in the wash, one you can use at those early phases as well. So yes, I think with regards to those early sort of the bedding and the blanket and the sort of the clothing side of it, I think you can get a little bit sort of sometimes concerned about it, but it's relatively straightforward and simple. Keep it quite simple. And the other thing is as well, I think we also had a question about wearing hats, indoors, and babies do not need to wear hats indoors. That's for outside when it's cold and you need to put a hat on baby. That's very, very good. But I think indoors, babies do not need to be a hat. The main thing is with regards to the temperature in the room, round about 18 Celsius is round about right for babies, and to keep it quite comfortable. Sometimes we can even think 18 Celsius is actually not that warm, but actually it's fine with regards to babies. But yes, agree with on swaddling as well. If baby does start to wriggle or move quite a bit, you might have to think about the stopping of the swaddling. And also, I think the other thing is as well, some babies really don't like swaddling.
Yeah.
They're not very keen on it. So if they're not, it's maybe not something that you can sort of continue with. And that's absolutely fine as well.
Yeah, you mentioned about hats. You mentioned about hats, and the other thing to be mindful of is when you're getting in a car as well, is to, take their hat off when they're in the car and it's warmed up the car, because otherwise, we have the heating on in cars and they're very efficient now. So that's the other time, or, when we can start going shopping again, and you may be going to a shopping centre or a shop, is just whipping their little hat off. So, because babies lose their heat through their head and they can't take them off. So it's important that we're mindful of keeping them cooler.
Oh, that is such a good point, Sam. You're right. I mean, once we are allowed to go out again, and we do go to a shopping centre and places like that, occasionally you do spot sometimes, people are in the past, that go in with a pushchair with a cover on, and, the baby's inside, or the toddler, child's inside, little one, and they've still got all their very warm clothes on. So just be mindful of that. I think especially, with little ones, is just making sure remove things as soon as you're getting in an environment that's actually quite warm. And that is taking the hat off, and sometimes undressing and taking off, some of the padded clothes and coats that they can wear, is making sure they're loosened so that it's more comfortable for baby. I think that's a really good point actually there. So I think with regards to, we've covered quite a few of the points with regards to early sleep, and but I think moving on now a little bit, Sam, and your views on, I think it's going into the next phase with a baby, and what baby's moving on to, which is, this is your baby, around about 3 months, around about 3 or 4 months, they're sort of really getting into that baby phase. They're no longer really quite in the newborn phase. And we know there's quite a few things that we're going to be picking up with regards to, well, for a start, you'll know your baby pretty well at this particular stage, but it's also picking up on sort of their cues about sleep. And also, I don't know if you feel this, but you're sort of gradually starting to do a few more things that are steering you into a sort of nice bedtime routine, a healthy, good sort of routine for babies in the evening, what works for baby and is very beneficial for baby, but also beneficial for the whole family as well, is what are the things that we should be sort of thinking about and doing. And the other thing is as well, I mean, I know we were talking about this a little while, is some of the terms that are out there a little bit at the moment. I mean, one of the terms that I'm not so sure about is used a little bit is the regression, sleep regression. And because I often think babies are always developing and changing. That's the nature, especially in the first year. My goodness, if you think where a baby starts and where a baby ends up, at the year is just amazing. Phenomenal amount of development takes place. And part of that, you will have phases when you're in a pattern, and then it changes, and then it settles, and then it goes into another pattern. And that's the nature of how babies are. I think that definitely in the first year is to expect some of those changes. But Sam, do you want to give us your take, I suppose, really on that little bit older baby, and the sort of things to be tips that can be really helpful, over these next few months, really?
Yeah, between sort of 3 to 4 months, they go through a massive development leap, and that it does have an impact on their sleep, or sometimes does, not all babies do. But it's down to they start to be aware of how and where they fall asleep, and their sleep cycles are maturing and they're becoming more adult-like. And before this stage, they sort of had 2 stages of sleep, light and deep, and then all of a sudden they have what is more like 5 stages of sleep. And unfortunately, a lot of those are light sleep. So they're very easy to wake. They come into light sleep very quickly. And if you watch your baby sleep, you might see after about 20, 30 minutes, they start to have a wiggle and twitch. what's happening is they're moving into the next sleep cycle, and it's very easy to think they're actually waking up and they've woken up and they're ready to play, but actually what they're doing is slipping into the next sleep cycle, into the deep deep sleep and the non-REM sleep, where they're very still. And if you watch a baby sleep, you see this REM sleep, this rapid eye movement, it's called, where their eyelids, they're asleep, but their eyelids are twitching and they may be moving like this and their arms are going. And then all of a sudden they slip into this very deep sleep where you're sort of, you're like, are you there still, sort of thing, and they're still. And that's when they're actually processing everything, and they're growing and developing. So it's important to allow your babies to have these different stages of sleep. And this, as I say, starts to mature between 3.5, 4 months, and it can affect their sleep. So what happens is they might have been beforehand having long stretches of sleep in the day, and now all of a sudden they're waking up after 45 minutes, and that's quite normal. And so what I normally suggest then is that if that's happening, that they have 4 to 5 little sleeps in the day between sort of regular feeds, rather than trying to focus on them having really long sleeps, 2 to 3 hours every afternoon. They're just not ready for it.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen until they're a little bit older. So it's just making sure they don't get overtired, that they have appropriate awake windows, which for that age is between 1 and 1.5 hours, and during that time they're feeding, nappy changing, winding, and then they're ready to sort of have another little nap again. And by this sort of age, it's looking at things like, as you said before, having a little bedtime routine, so that they're going down a little bit earlier and you're getting a little bit of an evening as well, and so it's about having that, whether that starts at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock, it's about beginning to build that into your routine. So having that bath time, nappy off time, sort of maybe a little bit of massage, and then getting them into their night sort of clothes and their sleeping bag, and giving a feed, and then settling them down and yourself down to sort of a quiet sort of time in the evening.
Well, that sounds wonderful, Sam, and that's just the sort of thing that I'd be sort of aiming towards, really. And I think the other thing is with regards to a question that comes up quite a bit, I think, is this soothing, things self-soothing, baby trying to get used to the idea of, putting them, dropping to sleep themselves, which we know can be quite important, really. But it's also when parents are going through a bit of a tough time, what are the sort of things, we talked a bit about swaddling can help. But the other things that can be helpful, we talk about the different types of white noise, sort of, can that be helpful to parents, which it seems to be very helpful sometimes to babies. And also things like using a dummy. If you've got a baby that, sort of seems to want to feed quite a lot, maybe it's sort of just try to use the dummy for a little bit. Does it help again? So what are your thoughts with regards to this important, really important topic? I think is the encouraging baby to be developing this skill of falling to sleep, and also the other things that can sometimes be a little bit of a help to parents.
Yeah, I mean, self-soothing is an important skill for them to learn for when they're older, and so anything. I sort of don't recommend much before sort of 3 to 4 months, and I would say from about 4 months doing some very sort of gentle, trying to settle them down, that they begin to learn to fall asleep on their own, is a good idea. So it's about sort of, if you've been, say, feeding them to sleep or rocking them, which is perfectly natural and normal in those early weeks, especially breastfed babies, they fall asleep at the breast all the time, is just being mindful to put them down that little bit sooner, maybe keeping your hands on them so that they can feel your presence still, but helping them to drift off to sleep in their cribs rather than in your arms. And that would be where you'd start it, very gentle and calm. And from about 4 months, you could sort of do some more pick up, put down, which is, I have a sleep coaching app, which has 2 methods on there. And one is suitable from 4 months, and it is sort of based on about very responsive, lots of cuddles. So, you know, but it's starting very gently and calmly with this putting them down, relaxed and well fed, comfortable, dry, and then they sort of begin to learn to fall asleep on their own. Dummies are sort of really useful in the early months for sure. And, you know, it might be useful for sort of stretching feed times, or if the baby's unsettled. And I sort of often, again, when I talked about this sleep leap, they become very aware of how they fall asleep. So sometimes you might find that babies from about 4 months, they want the dummy popped back in constantly, sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
you know, which is, if it works for you, that's brilliant. And if you're happy to, excuse me, do that. But if you're finding that is, you know, you'd like to sort of change that, then it is about sort of, that's a good time to think about maybe losing the dummy from about 4 to 6 months if it becomes an issue for you. But, you know, it is a great sleep aid.
Yeah.
But if it becomes that problem, that's a time to sort of think about taking it away.
Yeah. And what do you think about, you know, we talked about sleep and the natural patterns that babies start to develop, certainly around about 4 months or 5 months. And I think, you know, we've all been guilty of this, you know, with my own children as well, is that you hear them wake and you're just in there very quickly, or you hear them sort of murmur, or you put them down and they cry and you sort of, I know I've done that in the past actually, and I think there's always that temptation sometimes to immediately jump in, and actually even your little one could be overtired, and picking them up again is maybe not what they need at that particular time. What do you say about that sort of side of things?
Yes, I mean, if you know, if you're sort of quite confident they've fed well and they're sort of tired, then it is maybe sort of not rushing, as you say, giving them a couple of minutes. Don't be frightened to give them those couple of minutes to see whether they'll settle back off again. As I said, they might be in that lighter sleep stage and just being able to drift back off again. So, you know, putting your hands on them, doing some little shush and patting, maybe just help them drift back off again. And you know, babies from 8 to 12 weeks start to sleep for longer stretches in the evening, early sort of part of the night. And so giving them the chance to do that is important. And they might be just having a stir and want to go back off rather than waking for a feed again. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Sam. No, I think it's really a good point. I think sometimes, especially if you're close to your baby and, you know, you fed your baby, I don't know, it's nighttime, you know, sometimes you think, oh, my baby's waking up again. It's maybe just to wait, you know, you're near your baby anyway, you're close by. Just give it a few moments just to see where the baby's trying to settle themselves, actually, which I think, you know, sort of can be a, you know, a good thing to use occasionally.
I also think expectations for babies sleeping through is not, you know, I have to say, you know, most babies wake easily for a feed in the night, 1 or 2, even 3 feeds until they're 6 months. That's quite normal. Some babies, yes, will sleep for long stretches. Between 8 to 12 weeks, you know, sort of 5-6 hours, but it's not unusual that they start waking again for that feed, and it's just about going with them as well. And if they want, you know, if they're feeding every 3 to 4 hours, that's perfectly normal. And being up 2 or 3 times a night, as I say, is normal until they're 6 months. Then things start to sort of settle down a little bit.
That's a really good one, because we did have a few questions, you know, sort of from mums and parents, you know, with regards to, oh, you know, when can I possibly get, you know, take away a particular feed, you know, in the middle of the night, or when will my, you know, 8-week-old possibly be sleeping through the night. And I think, you know, you've answered the question in a way, really. It's just during the first 6 months, is it will be very changeable, and sometimes you will be still giving, you know, sort of those feeds in the evening. But I would ask one question though, and is when you've got maybe a 5-month-old, 4 or 5-month-old, how do you do it if they're still in a very similar pattern to they were with feeding when they were possibly 2 or 3 months? You know, if they're still doing feeds every 2 hours or something, or 3 hours, how would you suggest, or what might you suggest if you've got an older baby, I suppose, and you would expect a few of those feeds to be probably changing a little bit? What would you be looking at if they were sort of seeming as though they wanted to feed on a very regular basis?
So if if they haven't got sort of weight problems and you're quite confident that they're sort of gaining weight naturally and normally, then making sure in the day they're beginning to stretch their feeds out. So maybe sort of if they're feeding every hour and a half in the day, they are naturally going to want that pattern at night. So sort of beginning to distract them for 10-15 minutes in the day, and over a space of maybe 2 weeks, you start to stretch those feeds out to more 2.5, 3 hourly. Then the night feeds should settle down as well. But also in the night, if you're confident that they've had a good feed, and I always try and say to parents to feed to full or to mums or dads, if they're bottle feeding, feed to full in the night. So not overfeeding them, but making sure they've had not just a 2-minute snack sort of thing, and they're having tiny little feeds every hour, is making sure they have a good feed. And then if they do wake an hour and a half later, seeing whether a cuddle is what they need, rather than instantly thinking, oh, I need to feed you again. So sort of trying some shush and pat, or if not, then a cuddle and a rock, and then putting back down again, and see if you can begin to stretch these feeds out in the night. So it's not always, your first response isn't always, oh, you want to feed. It might be they've got a bit of wind, or they just want resettling again back to sleep.
Yeah, I think that's very much with older babies. And of course, it mustn't, I suppose, forget is that older babies is just starting to become very reactive. There's sort of, you've got a 4 or 5 month old, they're going to be, looking at you, interacting, wanting to use their hands more. Of course, we're going to have development wise, they're going to be starting to do early rolling, maybe. There's a lot of physical activity going on there as well, actually. So I think it's very easy, and I can understand that habit sometimes of, oh, my baby's woken up and distressed, I'll feed again. And I think the other thing is as well, the wonder of breastfeeding, and breastfeeding my children as well. It's so easy to just sort, oh, they've woken again and I'll breastfeed them again, which is fine. But I think sometimes it's looking at how that's working with regards to your daytime routine and the nighttime routine. And it's always go with it. If you're happy with it, keep with it. Yeah. But if you're looking at it, then just have a look at what's happening, with regards to your baby's development at that particular time. So I think actually we've nearly finished all the topics that we were going to talk about this time, which has been wonderful. And I don't know, Sam, whether there's any other little points that you want to. I know we've looked at the questions, we've tried to incorporate the questions that you've very kindly given us, but is there anything else that you've thought we've missed possibly, and we need to mention at this stage?
I think we've covered a lot of things. I think it's about going with the flow for the first few weeks for sure, and not having huge expectations as well, it's all well and good. There's a lot of influencers out there who sort of give out, this should be happening and that should be happening, and that's maybe what their baby's done, but your baby is unique to you, and so it's it's finding your rhythm and your pattern, and sort of enjoying them. I think that's so important, and not having huge expectations for those first few months is important.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Sam. I think, you've hit exactly, the point that I want to get across is, those early months, just go with the flow, every baby's unique and different, and, just be guided by your baby. And the other thing is, I think, just mentally, just bear in mind, it's just, you're adjusting to a new situation. As parents, you're learning new skills, you're adapting to your baby. And if you get to a situation where you're feeling not so good, and that could be mentally, physically, or even your baby, you're not so sure how baby's doing, if you're worried in any way, do not hesitate to get in touch. Midwives, health visitors and GPs, they know at this time that it's natural, and sometimes things do crop up. Don't trust your instinct. If something doesn't feel right, you know, or you don't feel right in yourself, it's wonderful to get help and support, because that really just makes, once you share an issue that may have cropped up for you, it can make you feel so much more just better being able to share that with somebody. So I think that's really important to know. And there's some really good advice that you can get online, you know, some really good websites that give good advice and things. Mine's very good with regards to mental health. There's Baby Centre, you know, there's the NHS Direct, you know, there's really good advice there. But what I would also say, I don't know if Sam, you agree with this, is try to stick to a few websites you really trust, and also try to stick to maybe 1 or 2 baby books. That's it. Try not to do, I mean, my goodness, if you search for something on the internet now, especially something like sleep, you probably get, you know, a tremendous amount of information that can actually sometimes just be totally overwhelming. So stick to something that you trust to dip into, and I think that can be quite reassuring. And really try, and it is challenging at times, but also it's just a wonderful time that you're going through, and this period of time is relatively short. So when you do have those nights that are not so good, just remember it's going to pass. It will pass. You'll look back on this. So but anyway, I very much hope you're going to join us. We've got another session happening, which is going to be from 6 months. Sam and myself are doing from 6 to 12 months. We will be talking a little bit more about coaching, gentle coaching, and sleep training. You know, it's very popular at the moment. There's lots of talk about it. We're going to sort of, you know, give you the basics, give you information about it so you can make your own decision. And then we've got another session happening after that, which is going to be talking about sleep, you know, for the older toddler, really, the older baby, 12 months plus, and the sort of things that might be popping up, you know, that you may want to know about. But anyway, thank you so much, you know, for joining us. I hope you found this very, very helpful. Sam, tremendously, thanks so much for your words of, you know, knowledge and wisdom that have been very, very useful, very much so to new parents and expectant parents as well. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.